Well, welcome back to Kitchen Table TCG. Today we're going to look at the weekly top 10. We're going to number it 10 to 1 by percentage gain, and then we'll go the other way for percentage loss. This uses all my market update information from the other videos throughout the week. If you're not a patron yet, head on over to patreon.com/KitchenTableTCG to see if it's right for you. For just $5 a month, you get access to all my data as a collection tracker. It's a great way to kind of track the value of your collection, kind of track if you have all the cards in the set, and just keep track of things. And that's not the only perk as a patron. Patrons have plenty of perks. Go ahead and look at it at the website. But if you are interested in more of my opinions on stuff, at a $15 tier, I do have a podcast called If I Were Investing, where I kind of share all the fun stuff I would be doing if I had the amount of money to invest in flesh and blood. But without further ado, let's hop into the top 10 winners of flesh and blood through this week with our top 10 cards to gain value, number 10 to 1 by percentage gain. And as usual, we have some cold foil commons on this. Actually, 5 total cold foil commons on the top 10 list. This is Robe of Rapture from Arcane Rising. Last week was sitting at 480. This week is at 800. That's a gain of 67%. And a lot of the Arcane Rising cards are on this list, especially in the cold foils, as a result of those just kind of trailing WTR cards for some bizarre reason. But that seems to be what the market is saying. Robe of Rapture made this list on the top 10. There were some more kind of below the top 10 as well, so a lot of the cold foil commons moving as people are understanding just how rare they are and how equally rare or becoming equally rare they are compared to legendaries. And at number 9, we have Metacarpus Node. This is a cold foil majestic from Crucible of War. Last week was at 475. This week is again at 800. Another card up there in the $800 range. That's a gain of 68%. This is a wizard equipment. I don't know that even really matters these days. I think really what matters is the cold foilness. And what people are doing is they're doing the math on the rarity of the majestic rainbow or the majestic cold foils and doing the math and comparing them to legendaries and even, comparing them to the fabled and understanding how few of these exist. And the Crucible of War Majestics are definitely showing up on those lists as a result, as we will see as we get to number 2 as well. So moving into number 8, we have Sledge of Anvalheim. This is actually a cold foil rare from Crucible of War, and not nearly as rare as the cold foil commons or the cold foil majestics, obviously. And you are seeing that reflected in the price, moving from 200 to 340, puts it at about half or even a little less than half of the average majestic cold foil or cold foil common. And that all lines up with the print numbers and with the print run. So it's a gain of 70%. Guardian on here as well, which is not super meaningful. It's we're not seeing any signs of other Guardian cards moving up, but that just seems to be the one that moved up this week from the cold foil rares, as we saw some other things move as well. And at number 7, we've got Nullrune Gloves, another cold foil common. I'm going to be a broken record this week. We've got one moving from $375 in that $400 range up to $650. That's a gain of 73%. And we are seeing all these Nullrune equipments kind of sitting in the same amount, but they're moving at different levels because it's the last time that they sold. I think Nullrune Hood is sitting at like $525. That card moved about 65%. So a lot of these Nullrune cards are moving as they are cold foil commons again. And these are the type of cards that people put into their deck and they want to have because, you're going to need to play Nullrune, and it's a great, I wouldn't even call it a sideboard card, but against those decks that require you to play Nullrune, it's nice to have those cold foils for a lot of people. But it does not have to be generic, as we see here with Crown of Dichotomy, a Runeblade equipment moving from 400 to 700. Again, a cold foil common. That's a gain of 75%. So even the kind of class-specific cold foils are moving up and are being targeted as people understand, again, how rare they are and, again, how beautiful. This card particularly looks just absolutely beautiful in cold foil. And you're just not going to be able to get them. These are going to fall the same way as the legendaries fall, where the market is just going to be completely bare on them pretty soon. We've had a lot of them move in the last couple weeks, but eventually those will reach the diamond hands who want them for their collections. And again, at number 5, we have Mage Master Boots, another cold foil common. This one is generic, going from 280 to 500. And honestly, 500 is on the lower end of the cold foil commons right now, as others, as you've seen, are moving into the $800 range. Anywhere from 750 to 800 seems to be the high side of it. So 500 is still the low side, but a 78% gain. And Mage Master Boots has a pretty good effect too that could see significant changes in in abilities or significant increase in playability as we see some more cards spoiled in Monarch. So it'll be interesting to see some of those things as we start seeing non-attack action cards or whatever else happens as cards are spoiled. Number 4 is Knock the Death Whistle. This is just a first edition rainbow foil moving from $100 to $200. It's a gain of 100%. Again, we've talked about Ranger cards for a while as they've been kind of a specker's choice here in anticipating the Monarch spoiler season and the Monarch cards. So we'll see if that pans out. Now, I don't think that means that these are all going to go down to zero if Ranger is not spoiled or if it doesn't get any Arsenal support or something like that. But that's just right now, that's what's driving the price of these up. And then their cards are just amazingly beautiful too. A lot of the Ranger artwork's really good and looks really good in rainbow foil, and that does matter to collectors. I have been talking to them, and it is interesting to know that matters. And number 3, we have Chain Lightning. Talk about a card that looks good in foil, moving from $65 to $131, a gain of 101%. And again, I just want to say that a lot of the collectors I'm talking to, it is less about playability and more about wanting to either finish a collection or they just really like the card, and that really does matter to people. And I think more and more first edition cards will move outside of putting them in your deck to show them off and inside of putting them into your collection to show your collection off. But that's where we're going to see some of the movement in the future of these cards, because I'm not sure how many people are willing to sleeve up $300-$400 deck, cards and decks. But all right, number 2, we have Perch Grapplers. This is another cold foil majestic. Like I said, the cold foil majestics, I said this earlier, are moving way up as people understand just how rare they are. Just slightly less rare than the cold foil legendaries because there are more of them in each set, or in Crucible War there are more majestic. So moving from $365 to $750 for a gain of 105%. And again, Ranger equipment, kind of all these things are all aligning for cards like Perch Grapplers, where lots of people are speccing on them. We got the print run numbers, just a lot of things causing this card to see significant increases and week-to-week increases as well. And then the number 1 card to gain value is another Null Rune card, another cold foil common. This one from Arcane Rising. This is last week we saw it at $350. This week we're seeing it at $730. That's a gain of 109%. And again, the Null Rune equipment in particular is kind of a great spec, because what people are thinking is every deck needs to be running some sort of Null Rune robe or Null Rune equipment as a result of potentially playing that Arcane in the meta. So that's what's going to cause a lot of these to grow. And again, there's just not that many of them. There's just no downward pressure to keep the prices down. All right, and now let's move on to the top 10 cards to lose value. We'll start with number 10 and go down to number 1, which will be the card that lost the most value. And unfortunately, one of my favorite cards in the game, Coax a Commotion. This is the first edition normal version of the card, non-foil. Last week was sitting at $22. This week is at $17. It's a loss of 22%. Unfortunately, we still haven't heard any word from LSS on any PvE content. And PvE is player versus environment content, kind of like a multiplayer where you're playing against some sort of other being or other equipment or other creature or whatever. You have to all work together to destroy, and this card would be fantastic in any game mode that is working together. Unfortunately, the card won't see any play in any normal meta, but once it does have a PvE content, this card will be mint. All right, number 9, Steelblade Supremacy. Weird to see a warrior card on the list, but this is just the Alpha Edition normal non-foil. Last week was sitting at 70. This week is at 54. That's a loss of 22%. And again, a lot of these non-foil cards, there's just more of them in the market. So you get some of that downward pressure that you don't normally get on like a rainbow foil majestic where there's only 500 of them. There's just never going to be downward pressure on the cards. It'll kind of always be the sellers dictating the marketplace. But when it comes to the non-foil, the demand just isn't quite as there. And of course, there are more cards in those versions. So that being said, there's just not enough downward pressure, and you'll see some stuff like this every now and then. Number 9, we've got Mangle. This is the first edition. This is the rainbow foil version of Mangle. Last week was sitting at $30. This week's at $23. It's a loss of 23%. And again, I kind of said this earlier, Guardian just is not the greatest class, and right now there's just not a ton of people playing Guardian. The card is great, the card looks great, but it's just one of those things where there's enough of them in the marketplace that when it's not the meta or when people aren't building decks, like right now no one is building new decks, so it's just not going to cause any movement in a card like this that doesn't see that much play in a class that also doesn't see very much play. So that's kind of what's causing Mangle to have a little bit of softness. But in number 7, we also have Find Center. This is a card that is in the meta. This is the first edition rainbow foil, and you will see this card again coming up in a little bit. This went from $76 to $58. That's a loss of 24%. Now, this card is kind of new in the meta of the game right now. And what that did is it caused the card to spike in price over the last 2 weeks. This card was on or close to the top 10 gainers list. And what's going on here is now people are stopping and building decks. They're not building any more decks in preparation of Monarch, and that's causing people to then enter the market with cards to sell. And again, that just kind of causes the market to drop, and they're taking their gains on this particular card. And number 6 is Snag, last week at 22, this week at 16. This is the normal non-foil version. It's a loss of 27%, and a card like this really interests me because this card was so hot 3 months ago. It seemed like a lot of the copies of this card were drying up in the market. I'm not sure if that was an individual who was speccing on them or if it was just a large group of people. It doesn't seem like this card sees any play in the meta. But I think it's interesting that we are seeing a lot more instance in Monarch spoilers, and that could land a card like this to see a significant play if instants become more viable or more important as the game moves on and the game grows in dynamics. Number 5 is the normal version of Find Center, and you can apply everything that I said about the foil version of this card to the non-foil version, but just more confirmation of this card right now being driven by the meta. Last week it was at 47, this week's at 33. It's a loss of 29%. And again, I just want to reiterate what happened is that this card started seeing play in the meta, so a bunch of copies got bought up, but now no one's really building decks, and maybe they tried the deck and they didn't love it, and now more cards are exiting the meta or exiting the field, and people just don't need them anymore, and so that's why more people are selling them, and nobody's building decks to kind of buy up those cards that people are then selling. Number 4 is Spark of Genius. This is the first edition rainbow foil, going from 75 to 52. That's a loss of 31%. This is one of those cards that also surprises me. It seemed like the super rares are very, very hot. They weren't making like the percentage gains as much as some of the like cold foil commons, but a lot of the super rares were up and were moving in the upwards direction this week. And over the last 3 weeks, they seem to be targeted by a lot of investors. So interesting to see a super rare that is a rainbow foil and not super popular going down. But again, this is not one of the more popular ones that a lot of people want either. And in number 3, we have Rapid Fire. This is a card that I love. I love the artwork of this card. It is absolutely cool the way that the artwork looks like it's in 3D. First edition rainbow foil, again, going from 200 to 120. At least 120 is more in tune with the current price of other super rares. Like 200 would be on the high end, whereas the Spark of Genius was 75. That would be incredibly, or I think it sold for 52. That'd be incredibly low for the low end of the super rares. But 120 is kind of more of an acceptable price for the super rares, so I kind of understand that there. So this week, moving from 200 to 120, that is a loss of 40%. And again, the card looks beautiful, and I would love to own one of those. All right, going to number 2, Massacre. Now, Massacre, I would just like to have a playmat, but this is the first edition normal version. Last week at 28, this week at 15. It's a loss of 46%. I have seen more brutes in my games lately. I'm not sure that Massacre is like the best card in a brute deck though. And I haven't played Brute. I don't know a ton about Brute, but it's just not a card that I've seen played against me very often. So that might be why some of this is soft. And again, $15 isn't extremely high for a non-foil from first edition crew. But it's just one of those things where you get cards like this that enter the marketplace, and people are trying to sell stuff right now to provide themselves with money for Monarchs. That might be one of those things there. And in number 1, we have one of the best artworks in the game, Mordred Tide. This is the first edition non-foil of Mordred Tide, going from $108 to $38. That's a loss of 65%. And if you remember last week, I said that sale of $108 was just too high. And we do see things like this in the marketplace often when a card is so dry and there's no availability, and then somebody does buy one of those cards at $108. It causes this kind of stir, this weirdness in my pricing. But that's just kind of the way that it is when you have a marketplace that has so little cards. So 108 just didn't make sense last week. 38 is more in line with the other non-foil Majestics. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. That was the top 10 winners and losers. Again, if you'd like to support the content, head on over to patreon.com/KitchenTableTCG, where I do have some perks for you. At $5 a month, you can have access to a collection tracker, which allows you to see the real-time value week to week of your collection. I also have a podcast if you're interested in some of my opinions on what I would be doing to invest heavily in Flesh and Blood. I do believe it's a great market to invest in, so head on over to patreon.com/KitchenTableTCG. And also, just thank you so much for being here. Thanks for watching the videos. If you can't afford to support me or don't want to support me on Patreon, that is okay. Thank you so much. And remember to be kind to the people around you.